We're back with our show, Nature by the Book. I'm Janine.
And I'm Gareth.
Hey, Gareth.
Hey.
We're back to talk about a book about nature. Today we're talking about?
We're talking about The Hidden Life of Trees. It's a book by Peter Wallenburn, and it's what they feel and how they communicate and discoveries from a secret world.
Right. So we've read this book a while ago, and we talked about it. What I found interesting about it was about the author, first of all, to start with the author. Mm-hmm. Because the author, he wrote a book about trees, the care of them, what they feel, the discoveries of a secret world. But he actually started his life in trees as a forester.
Yeah, I think he was working in the field for a number of years. I think we're talking decades. And he went into that field because he wanted to work with nature.
But he was actually grooming forests for the lumber company.
Right.
Yeah. So he was grooming them to be cut. Mm-hmm. So, and he talked about, he said in the book that he knew about as much about trees as a butcher knows about the emotional life of animals.
I think he had an epiphany at one point where he says, what am I doing here? I'm just cutting down trees. This is not what I got into this industry for, because it is an industry. And I think he had those moments of like, hang on, I don't really know how these trees interact. And I think reading some scientific papers, and when he brought different people into those woods, they viewed it a little bit differently. And I think there was a point where he brought some people to the woods and they said, well, this is a plantation, not a woodland. And I think there was those moments of, something's different here.
Yeah. So he'd been working for probably 20 years or something, and had, this, like you said, an epiphany about the wonder of the trees and, what it was that he was really working with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, he talks a lot about different things in this book, but one of the things that really struck me was, he talked about how, we normally think of plants as things that just sit there. They're inanimate objects that we don't really see them as doing anything. Oh, no. Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm just kicking you too close here. But it's easy for us to miss the actions that trees do specifically because, they have such a large lifespan,
right.
longer lifespan than us. And so when the title is The Hidden Life of Trees, and I kind of took that as, a couple ways. Hidden life meaning, we see what we see in the top part of the trees, but we don't see what's going on underground with the root system, which is crucial,
yes.
of course. And also the hidden life of the aspect of the part we don't see of the trees because of our lifespan is so much shorter than trees, which some can live 200 to 300 years.
Yeah, and that's even on the short end of things. Some of them can live 500 to 1,000 years. Some of these ancient oaks, say in the UK or in Europe, are very, very old. And the bristlecone pine is thousands of years old.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't comprehend those kind of timescales.
Yeah, so the changes that might happen over their lifespan is something we don't even see, you know. So.
I think that was the nice thing about the book is how he brought attention to, kind of like gave us the story of what trees interact. And I'm sure you felt this way. It's like when a tree moves, it moves very, very slowly, but its timescale is very different as well. So you mentioned 200, 300 years. When we move our hands, whatever. When a tree moves, it moves throughout the day, but you can see that change throughout the day. And I think that's the thing that was very interesting, is like we don't think in the right timescale, we think of it almost as inanimate. Yeah. And I think that's what the nice thing, I'm sure for you, how the book kind of breathed life into trees.
Right, and they also, and I know there's a lot of books coming out now about the non-human consciousness of things like of mushrooms or fungi, and he kind of touches that on in trees because in the book he talks about how trees have this ability to communicate with each other, or to feel pain, or to even protect each other.
Right.
He gives the example of when a parasite, attacks a tree. The tree receives a message, and it emits a chemical to leave a bitter taste for it, so that the parasite will leave it alone. But what the tree also does is through its root system communicates to the other trees in the area.
Little chemical signals come out
to alert the tree as well that there's kind of a danger thing in the area. And of course, that's all something we don't see.
No. Did you like the style that he used because I know critiques of this book has been saying it's anthropomorphizing, which it is, but I think he says that from the get-go. Did you like that, or did you find that was a hindrance?
I don't, I just read it for what it was. I kind of, maybe I have the tendency to do that anyways, when I'm walking through the woods or whatever, and, I kind of, maybe I'm guilty of that myself. So that didn't seem to.
I think we all are guilty to a certain extent.
And I guess if it helps somebody to relate to it in a way, I think then that's okay.
Yeah.
I could understand why the people don't want to do that, but I think if it also helps us to feel an empathy for something that we might not have, then I think it could be a benefit.
I think it made it very relatable. I mean, there's many.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a science background, and
Right.
but reading it, I was like, okay, this is what he's doing. That's fine. All right. Actually, it allowed me to read it very quickly and easily. A lot of things they're very dry.
Yeah.
This wasn't a dry book, and I think it was very relatable to other people.
It is, yeah. So I kept thinking. I thought of you when I was reading this because of your work at Lake Catherine. You deal, of course, with the caring of trees and nature there. So I'm wondering, how did that, how did that affect you?
There was definitely a few moments in the book that I actually now think a little bit differently about how I manage trees. We get a lot of our trees from nursery stock. And as it mentions in the book, a lot of times they'll prune the roots back from nursery because that's just the way it is. That's how the industry goes. And there's some evidence to suggest, and he took it, that you're taking away almost like, I wouldn't say the thought process, but the investigative nature of a tree roots, like those early tree roots, kind of combined with other things. They have the mycorrhizal fungi, which is very symbiotic with it. And then also how, like, when you have, so that was interesting to me because it meant that I'm now thinking about how to plant trees closer together of the same species. And I don't know if those roots...
You do that or you don't?
I do a little bit, like clustering of the same species.
Are you not supposed to?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's ideas about how you have to space a tree out, give it plenty of room to grow. And that's kind of true if you want it to look a certain way. But maybe it's better if you plant like trees with like trees, make it more of a forest community, even though it's a small to begin with. So I've definitely impacted a little bit of how I do my day-to-day operations. Kind of create that the underground is almost as important as the overground. And Lake Catherine's such a new property in the scheme of a tree's life.
I mean, it's been in existence, 1987?
Yeah, but it's not long.
Yeah.
The root, so the soil.
Excuse me.
Yeah, the soil, frog in the throat.
Keep talking.
Keep quoting. The soil structure is new, and soils are often taken millennia sometimes to form. And the roots and fungal associations within that soil, they're all, what we're doing is all brand new stuff. So it's going to take time for that soil structure to get to where it should be, and maybe those interactions will start to occur. But it's more of like almost a little philosophical approach to how you plant these things. It's
kind of funny because we looked recently at the historical pictures of Lake Catherine that we have so far and to what it looks like now. And there is a big difference already, But so what is it going to look like in another, 50
100 years?
Yeah, 100 years.
I'm thinking 100 years with this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, all the trees we have now are about 50 years. Maybe some of the cottonwoods are older, but essentially everything's really young still.
Yeah. So reading this also, I thought of how it made me think of other things, like the way that he talks about the way trees work together. Okay, like if a tree wants to go on its own or is on its own, it has to deal with all the elements by itself, like the weather and the wind. But like when they grow together in an environment or a community or forest or whatever, they protect each other from extreme hot heats and colds and the hots and cold temperatures, the winds, and they even are able to store more water for themselves.
Right.
And so they kind of work together,
I thought it was very interesting with how you may have maybe a more elderly tree or a sickly tree, and then one of the other trees that's maybe doing better will pass sometimes either nutrients and sometimes water from one tree to the next to actually help that other ailing tree.
Yeah.
And it's almost, in the book, obviously they use the thing, it was like helping your elders and that kind of thing. But it kind of instantly made it relatable. And that world wood web connectivity between species of the same.
The word, how is it? The
world wood web.
It's a tongue twister. The wood world web. How everything is like connected.
Or some combination thereof.
Yeah.
Did you like that kind of moment though? The way that did you think of trees interacting in that way before?
Not so much to that degree. Where they're actually, the way they can communicate to each other, or for the welfare of another tree. Even the part where the environment around them. He talks about certain times cottonwoods or beech trees or oak trees, will change how many nuts they will drop if the wildlife around it becomes too plentiful. Like if the deer are getting overpopulated, or the wild boar, the trees will hold back on how many nuts they'll drop. If I'm saying this correctly, or
yes.
To kind of modify the environment, to and have a sense of control over that, so that the things don't get overpopulated.
I can't remember what the signal was for that. Do you remember?
No.
But it's very interesting. It's like, how do they know not to distribute?
Yeah, like, do they have eyes? They're watching the woods. I don't know.
But it certainly does bring into account like the idea of like almost like a thinking,
like a
organism.
presence.
Yes.
Yeah, there's like a presence that an intelligence that can. I mean, this is what he talks about.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously that's the style of doing it. I think there's a lot of work out there to say is a tree intelligent? I don't know about that, but it's certainly picking up on signals, and it certainly makes us think about them in a different way. Of like they're responding to stimuli, they're responding to different things. When a pest attacks it, it's releasing hormones or pheromones, or it's actually releasing chemical signals. All that kind of stuff makes you think, well, how is that much different than what other organisms actually do?
Yeah. And even the way they work together, it reminded me of this other story that I heard about, redwoods. Okay. The redwood trees in California, they have a very shallow root system. They're huge, 300 feet high or more. And if you were to take a redwood out of its environment and, let's say, plunk it in the middle of the prairie, it wouldn't stand, it wouldn't grow.
No.
It needs the root system, it needs the strength of the other roots of the other trees to help it stand, and they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I thought, this, and then the other examples that he talks about with how they work together in other ways. I'm like, there's how they're interconnected, and it's like, okay, it reminds me, because I know I told you about another book I'm reading at the same time, that we people could learn a lot, humans could learn a lot from trees, the lives of trees. We're only as strong as the forest that surrounds us. A tree is only as strong as the forest that surrounds us. We're only as strong as our weakest link, So we as a people I feel, can really learn a lot from trees. Their example of taking care of each other and being interconnected, which we all are.
Yeah. Well, they realize that there's a benefit to it, right? So
yes.
Strong community, strong woodland community, strong forest community, strong human community. All those kind of things kind of tie in together. Like there's a reason why communities for certain species work, because it's beneficial and it's good. I mean, that sounds very kind of clinical, but there's a reason for it. Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you about that example about the wolves in Yellowstone Park. That was another example of how not just the trees with each other, but the whole environment around it. And he talks about the wolves in Yellowstone back in the 1920s, began to disappear. I mean, they were becoming extinct, right? Hunted to almost extinction. They disappeared, basically. So when the wolves disappeared from Yellowstone, the elk began to over-forage on the aspens and the willows and the cottonwoods.
And I think that was done purposely by hunters because they wanted more game species.
Oh, is that right?
Partly, yeah, because elk's a great game species. And wolves are regarded as something that's
and I know the ranchers have a problem with wolves.
There's multiple things.
So there's a whole other issues out there. But when you take away one species,
keystone species,
a keystone species out of an environment, then what happens? The elk overpopulate. They begin to overforage. The trees disappear, vegetation declined, all the animals that relied on the trees and other vegetation declined.
Beavers, for example, are famous for like maintaining a lot of the environments in those sort of areas, and so they declined.
So what is their significance?
Well, beavers create wetlands, and they actually slow water runoff, and they slow erosion, depending on certain circumstances. So if you have elk taking away, say, all the young sprouts of alder, I think it's traditionally alder in that area, then they don't have anything to either make that home, or an effective home, or effective dams. So instantly, the beavers will disappear because they can't survive, and then you'll have changes in the hydrology of the area as well.
Okay, all right.
So it's another knock-on effect.
Right.
And you're having more erosion from more extreme rain events. So there's a whole things there. Like the beavers were helped with doing hydrology management, basically.
Yeah. I didn't think of the erosion aspect or the maintain the water a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So, but when the wolves were reintroduced back, I think it was 70 years later.
Yeah.
70 years later, the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone. The elk had to be on the move, so they couldn't. They didn't have a chance to overforage.
Basically nervous. They're like, oh, I can't hang around here too long.
That's right. I can't eat up all the trees.
Yeah.
So the trees came back. Their root systems once again stabilized the stream banks. The beavers came back, along with other meadow animals. And he talks about how wolves actually turned out to be better stewards of the land than people were, creating conditions for trees to grow again.
Yeah.
So it's like we are all connected. You know, the picture in the book, you know, you'll see the root system.
Yeah.
You know, and I like
it's very dendritic into the lives of each other's trees and each other's.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. So that's what I get out of it. I mean, what did you, as a sciencey type of person, science person, nature, you know, what was there something that you really?
I think it makes you think a bit more about. Again, I think it's more the time scale for me. I mean, I take down trees as well, and I remove invasive species, but sometimes just making you think a little bit more about your actions. Sometimes, like, yes, we have to remove invasive species. Sometimes, absolutely. The things like buckthorn, honeysuckle, others that take over. But I think it's also he brings up the difference between a healthy woodland and a non-healthy woodland. A non-healthy woodland, apparently people's blood pressure actually goes up. So if it's like a plantation, like a conifer plantation, in an area that's conifers on.
When you say plantation, you mean like a tree farm?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. And people know instantly, even if they don't know why, and the habitat's wrong, there's not so many species. You go to somewhere like an actual more woodlands in it. So conifers in their natural setting, like in the taiga forest or the north of Canada or north of Norway, that's where the conifers are meant to be. There's things that are meant to be in that area, and then blood pressure goes down in that area. So like woodlands in the right places, allowed to do their thing, or allowed not to be out competed with other things, they make us feel better. So it's very interesting that like we can pick up on that, and sometimes we don't even know. Even now, I can walk into a woodland and go, something's not right here. And other times, like, yeah, this is all right. This is healthy.
What wasn't right? What do you sense?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to put fingers on it, but that's the nice thing about this book is sometimes it's outlining why, like maybe there's too many invasive species, or it doesn't seem healthy.
I see. Okay, I get you.
Or it's more colonial types of species where they're just coming in, so it means it's been disturbed a lot.
Oh, okay.
And some habitats are meant to be like that, and some are not. So you just think something's a bit off. So it's almost like the whole subconscious is actually knows something's off there.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the health benefits in a forest.
Oh yeah.
I know we've read other books about forest bathing.
Yeah,
right?
the nature fix.
Yeah.
Shinrin-yoku, all that kind of fun stuff.
What do they mean by nature bathing? Did I say the right word?
Yeah. No,
okay.
it is nature bathing or woodland bathing. So Shinrin-yoku is a Japanese word that basically means forest bathing, and that is the idea of going. They actually prescribe that in Japan as a way to reduce stress in people.
Meaning going out into the woods.
Yep, it's actually a prescription.
Just being you're not bathing in the woods, are you?
Well, you could if you wanted to.
But they mean just like bathing, meaning immersing yourself in the woods.
And not necessarily doing as well. So
okay,
so it doesn't mean to say you're being active. You may be just going for a stroll, and actually, I guess it's a form of meditation if you like.
So like immersing it, like just sinking into the woods, basically. Not literally, but
maybe.
Who knows? Yeah.
But yeah, it's just kind of relaxing a little bit and taking those in. There's chemicals that are released by the trees that makes people feel good. And I
So
think that's called phytokenes, I believe is the term for it. That may be wrong.
So they prescribe that in Japan, you
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Okay.
And so now it's actually noticing because it helps to reduce blood pressure in people. It makes people feel more relaxed. So it means like all those other medical conditions are actually reduced, which I think is kind of cool.
It is. I mean, and again, so that's like another hidden aspect of trees that, you know, at least wasn't aware of until you read the book.
But you kind of are aware.
I was going to say, subconsciously, I mean, I am attracted to the woods. I love walking in the woods. I, you know, ride my bikes. You know, my husband and I just vacationed over the last summer out in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, and we were in the Hoh National Rainforest. And I'm going to show some photos on this because the trees there are phenomenal, and you will, when you do walk into this, you you feel
good.
They call this one area almost like the chapel because you are, you know, you have the arches and everything's covered with the moss and. But the trees are huge.
Yeah.
They're like 300 feet tall. These are not even the redwoods. These are just other trees. I don't know the names of them. I'm not a sciencey person. But the beauty and the peace and just it's almost like a reverence when you're walking through there. So yeah, maybe not consciously aware that you know they have film or whatever they
everyone
release.
knows. It's just they may not think about it, and I think that's when we talked about it more recently about attention deficit disorder, and whatever that means. But essentially, it means that people aren't getting enough time in a natural setting for the benefits. We all come from a more natural setting. We all kind of enclose ourselves away from that, and so those moments when you go off into the woods, for example, are times when you can kind of reconnect and get those good feelings going. There's lower blood pressure, all that kind of good stuff, and. We know, and obviously we try to promote that as much as possible. I mean, the fact that we have to promote nature seems kind of daft, but at the same time, it's probably essential because we're so interconnected at other times.
Right. I mean, people end up living where they live. Whether it's an urban setting, maybe people don't have a choice where they live.
Well, that's why parks are so important as well. And some of those trees are even older there. And I know they probably urban trees have a lot more stresses, but having those natural areas in urban areas really does help people as well. And they also are great for wildlife because they kind of create those little jumping spots from one place to another. So yeah, some of those trees are a bit more stressed, but some of them seem to do well. Some of them are really old still. Yeah. They just work well there.
Yeah. So any other comments you want to share with on?
I think it's a great book. I mean, if anyone wants to read it, it's a really quick read. You learn a lot. And I think once you get around the head, around the idea of it being anthropomorphic but purposely so, I think it's okay. I think it's a good read in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, it just helped me to appreciate something that I thought that you take for granted so often, especially in our area. We do have, we're blessed with a lot of trees.
Look at science in here as well. I mean, the science is there. It's not, so we talk about, this is not all hippie stuff. This is actually solid science backing up the hippie stuff. Okay. If that makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
So being a tree hugger is a good thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, well, that's The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, and it's what they feel, how they communicate, and the discoveries from a secret world. Yeah. Glad we're able to talk about another book about nature.
Yeah, thanks, Janine.
And we'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.